What is up, Notre Dame fans? Welcome into this special blue chip ratio recruiting conversation. I am Ashton Pollard of blueandgold.com, and I am here with our football analyst, Tim Hyde. And today we're going to dive into some numbers in the often discussed blue chip ratio, which the newest one was released last week. So that's kind of why we're on this topic. But to start off, just a brief little explanation of the blue chip ratio, if you're not familiar. It was created by Bud Elliott, who's now at 24/7, but when he created, he was actually at SB Nation. And it's the percentage of 4 and 5-star prospects that a team signs in a recruiting cycle. So the highest of the high level talent that people are signing, and kind of bigger picture what Elliott did and the reason for creating it, and he now has the data to back it up, is that he's figured out that basically a team has to sign more blue chip recruits, so 4 and 5 stars, than 3 and 2 stars over a 4-year period to win a national championship. And he always notes that that's not the only thing. Obviously, you have coaching, schedule, a little bit of luck factored in there to end up winning a national championship, but by and large, you need to have more blue chip prospects than you do non-blue chip prospects. So, Tim, I'm going to throw it over to you really quickly, and we're going to talk about Notre Dame's current recruiting class. So I'll pop that up on the screen over here. But as you can see, Notre Dame's current class has a 95% blue chip ratio right there on the right side of your screen. Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what that means in the historical context going back in Notre Dame's more recent classes?
Sure. Notre Dame, obviously at 95%, this is an elite class. We've talked about it 1,000 times, and we'll be chatting about it from the games until signing day in December. So Coach Freeman and his staff are doing an amazing job. And, when you think Notre Dame, obviously people are like, oh, can they recruit this many guys? And I think, the key moving forward in the Coach Freeman area is the consistency. Can they do it? I mean, Notre Dame has recruited blue chip level before. And I started looking at it at the 70% mark, where Bud Elliott broke it down over the years. Like, if you hit that 70, you are elite recruiting. And Notre Dame's hit the 70s or higher. 10 out of the last, I went back 20 years, since all the data is out there. So half the time, 10 classes they have hitting 70 or higher. The problem has been at Notre Dame is when you're getting a 70 or an 80% blue chip, the next year you're at 55%. And that's the thing where, they've kind of had, some struggles at times. Even the great class of 2021, Joel Spindler, Blake Fisher and whatnot, they were in the low 50s when it comes to blue chip. High-end guys and a ton of 3 stars. So it is a fascinating data looking forward. But with the way Coach Freeman is recruiting, as we know, they're spending a ton of their time with the 4s and the 5s, and there's not a lot of 3-star offers out there, and even going forward into 2024. So can this continue, I think, is what Notre Dame fans are going to keep asking. And the data, at least moving forward, shows it will continue.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You brought up the 2021 class because we do tout that, and that was kind of a very highly ranked class. And then also the 2018 group also had a 51% blue chip ratio. 2019 was up to 80%. 2020 was up to 64%. And then again, the drop off back to 51%. So if you have these very high level guys that we talk about, and they're certainly important, the Blake Fishers, the Lorenzo Styles of the world, but you have to fill out that bottom half, I guess. And Alabama has done a really good job of, when they have 1 5-star or cycle out at, say, defensive line, defensive tackle, whatever, they immediately pop another one back in there. And that's kind of the difference between the elite of the elite and, say, the Notre Dame, who's in the conversation up there, kind of become a mainstay in the top 10. But when they face the Alabamas of the world, they're getting crushed. And that's kind of why. So, Tim, you talked about, you went back and looked at 2012, 2018, and 2020, those teams, not recruiting classes, but teams, because they were the ones playing 4 national titles. Obviously 18 and 20, that was in the playoff and they didn't make it past the semifinal, but same thing, had a shot at the national championship, technically speaking. What were you able to dig up from looking back at those groups?
Well, looking at those groups, real quick off of your comment of 2018, which just to go on that real quick, these guys would be the 5th year guys. the older guys, if they stuck around. Notre Dame had 13, just for the fans out there, 13 3-stars. And you're talking about Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson's, these teams that have been constantly in the playoffs, replacing a guy with another 4-star. So the bottom of that class with 13 3-stars, eight of those players never finished at Notre Dame. So that's where the bottom roster moving forward of replenishing it, where Bama and these guys are just constantly replenishing each and every year. Notre Dame's, the bottom of their roster, has been transferring in recent past because they haven't been able to perform at Notre Dame. And that's where they're constantly recruiting. And real quick, I heard a stat real quick. I was listening to a show on SEC Network. The one team talking about this 4 and 5 stars they were talking about on SEC Network was Georgia, no transfers this year. So what does that tell you? They're bottom of their roster they're pleased with, which is fascinating. Which goes back to, I looked at the Notre Dame teams that played for the national championship in the run under Coach Kelly. And I didn't look at the entire roster. I concentrated on the top 40, the top, 44 players that played, the 2 deep, some of the rotational guys, the return specialist and whatnot. And Notre Dame, were very elite on those teams. The 2012 team, 88% of basically the top 40 plus were 88%. Blue chips. That was a lot of blue chip bodies taking the field against Alabama. They didn't play that level because that was a freakish Alabama team. And then 18 and 20 making the Final Four, the same thing, 87% in 2018. And then the 2012 team, the 2020 team was 79%. So they all hit that high threshold, especially with 2 of those teams being in the high 80s. And like I said, those were the top 40 players that started. The one position I've noticed in looking at all this blue chip data where Notre Dame is constantly playing 3-stars has been at skill guys. A lot of DBs, a lot of 3-star DBs have been playing for Notre Dame on these teams. So that's been fascinating to look at. Linemen, running backs, tons of 4-stars all over the place.
Sure. We've talked a lot about wide receiver recently with how well Notre Dame's recruiting wide receivers. They've had a lot of 3-star wide receivers on the field too. Styles and Colsey, I guess, who are in the 2021 class and were the high end of that 51% blue chip class. They were very highly ranked. They were both, I believe we talked about this, that Colsey was like number 102 and then Styles was top 100. So basically they were both top 100 recruits, but by and large, Notre Dame's had a lot of 3-star wide receivers too on the field. Speaking of skill guys. So yeah, I guess we can just pop up and we can kind of return to this 2023 group that is at 95% right now. As you can see, let me pop it up really quickly. Sorry about that. As you can see, they have 1 5-star, and these are consensus rankings. So this is a combination of On3, ESPN, Rivals, and 24/7. So 1 5-star, 18 4-stars, and then a 3-star. Tim, how sustainable do you think keeping it's really hard to sign a class that's 95% because you also have to factor in the special teams guys, which they're always going to be 3-stars. So it's really hard to get to 100%. But Tim, how feasible do you think it is to maybe stay on top of these rankings, topping, say, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, those elite programs?
Great point, by the way, special teams, because Notre Dame does sign quite a few. A long snapper, they've had a bunch of them, punters, and whatnot that are in the data, which is fine. But they, going back to you and I talked at the beginning, is they are consistently going after these high end guys. So can it happen going forward? Yes, I truly believe they can, just because of the effort, the energy these guys are recruiting with. They are constant on guys. And number one, it has to maintain if you want to be playing for the Final Four and getting to that level, as we've learned in studying so much of this stuff. But it will be. Their 2024 class is looking outstanding. Mike Singer's already mentioned a ton of 25 offers out up there that are going to be top 100 guys. So as long as they just keep attacking, and it seems like it's going to continue with the effort, especially with Chad Bowen working in the recruiting offices, managing this thing, where so many of their offers have just been high end guys, getting them on campus and keeping that foundation going. So can it happen? Sure. I mean, Charlie Weiss had, 3 straight classes in the 80s. Charlie Weiss had 100% class, which was crazy. It always goes back to that next class is 55. And it's that constant compounding on classes on top of each other. So if Notre Dame can maintain this year, you're looking at 2024. That'd be, going back to last year's class, which was in the high 70s. All of a sudden now you got 3 straight classes, 75 plus. That's the Alabama, the Georgia level. And, Coach Freeman is going to work his tail off to get to that.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up Charlie Weiss because we've been digging through a lot of the On3 rankings recently, and his 2007 class that he signed, which, as we're all aware, was right before the 3-9 season, I guess, right? Yeah. That had 9 top 100 recruits in it, and Jimmy Clausen headlined that. He was a number 3 overall recruit in that class, but then it dropped off. So like 2008, 2009, 2010, you're getting 2-3 top 100 players, your blue chip ratio is dropping. And we all kind of saw what happened. And that led to the hiring of Brian Kelly a year or 2 later. So, yep.
Well, the point off of that, going back then, when this data started, Notre Dame fans that have been around a long time are well aware of Tyrone Willingham. His last 2 classes were 50%. So when you're only signing 50, and he had tiny classes, like 14, 15 member
Yeah, they
classes,
are really small.
Tiny small. So half of them are just dropped off immediately. And then Weiss has a big chunk of in the 90s, 100%. Then he has back-to-back 60. So when you're in the 60s, the odds of so many of those 3 stars making it are going to be low. And just real quick, as we end here, is 3 stars for Notre Dame fans. There's plenty of great 3 stars. We know that. But the law averages, right? Notre Dame in 20 years has had 120 3-stars signed, 120. Only 7 of those 120 were drafted in the NFL. It's a very, very low number. Obviously, these 3 stars are elite. We're talking Will Fuller, Tyler Eifert, Tommy Tremble, Nick Martin, CJ Prosise, some great football players that played for Notre Dame. So it's consistently getting as many of those 4s and 5s. And if you are going to get a 3 and you take a gamble on a great player like a Tyler Eifert and he pans out, kudos to you. But when you're signing nearly half of your class sometimes with 3 stars, it's not going to pan out for you down the road. It just hasn't shown.
Yeah, you brought up that draft thing. I just popped up this tool that On3 has. It's a draft by stars. This is over the last 5 years. As you can see, 3 stars are drafted at around a 6% rate. So Notre Dame's slightly over that, but again, look at the 5 stars, look at the 4 stars here. There's a significantly higher chance of having those players drafted. And obviously, if they're drafted, they've had really successful careers on the college football field. So, the drop off there is immense for sure.
Yes.
Yep.
And it's proven that with Notre Dame over the last 2 decades with Notre Dame recruiting the 3 stars. Some pan out more often or not. And especially the transfers, if we go back, I think Patrick Engel did an article a while back about the transfers. Majority of the Notre Dame transfers over the last couple of years have been the 3 stars.
Yeah, nope, very true. All right, that is it from us on the blue chip ratio. Make sure before you hop off here that you hit the thumbs up on this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out everything on blueandgold.com since it is July. So it's the off season. We have a couple more weeks till camp, but we're doing a lot of research-based kind of deep dives back before we get into the bulk of the season. So make sure you go check those out, and we will see you next time.